Good day, everyone. Dean Calhoun here with Affygility Solutions, and it's Saturday, August 25th, 2012. And today I'm going to answer a question from a client. The question is, the exposure limit that I see on the material safety data sheet for the product is significantly higher than the occupational exposure limit set by your company. What's up with that? Well, that's a great question, and it brings up a couple of very important points. The first important point is use extreme caution when evaluating the information on MSDS for an active pharmaceutical ingredient. Unless the exposure limits on those MSDSs have been prepared by experienced toxicologists, I wouldn't put too much trust in them. Unfortunately, in many cases, the task of authoring MSDSs may have been assigned to junior level personnel using existing templates, or maybe even contracted out to MSDS authoring companies. In addition, regulatory requirements really only require that exposure limits that have been published by governmental agencies such as OSHA or consensus organizations such as ACGIH be published on the material safety data sheet. There is no requirement out there to put internal limits. So let's use as an example vitamin D3, which sounds pretty harmless because it's a vitamin, right? Well, let's just wait and see. In this first MSDS, it states that the exposure limit is not available. Well, that's really not much help, is it? And the second MSDS also states that the exposure limit is not available. Now, this brings up my second important point. And that point is not available or not regulated does not equal not hazardous. Either of those terms simply mean that the author of the MSDS was unable to identify a regulatory exposure limit or a published exposure limit. Returning to our example on vitamin D3, in our third example of a MSDS, things start to get kind of interesting. Here they state that the industry TWA is 0.01 milligrams per cubic meter. Now, that's a really low exposure limit and very, very difficult to contain. I also find it interesting that they state it's an industry TWA, but really don't identify the source. All right, moving right along. Our fourth and final MSDS is from GSK for cholecalciferol. GSK, by the way, is a large international pharmaceutical company, and cholecalciferol is the same as vitamin D3. And their MSDS, they state that the GSK occupational exposure limit is 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter, which is 5 times lower than the exposure limit that we saw in the previous MSDS. I should also mention that they have assigned this compound to their occupational hazard category 5, which is the most extreme hazard category. So whose number do we believe? Whose number do we trust? Well, before I answer that question, I'd like to show you a snapshot of a professional journal article. In this journal article, they discuss an occupational exposure limit incident to vitamin D3 that resulted in some pretty serious adverse health effects. I should mention that this exposure limit was at the laboratory scale, so it was a pretty small scale. So this incident confirms that vitamin D3 is indeed very potent. Now back to our question, what number should I trust? If it was me, I would trust the GSK number. And not just because it's the lowest number, I would trust it because I know that GSK has the industry experience, and also from our experience here at Affygility Solutions, we know that they're a reputable company with reputable occupational toxicologists that are deriving this number. So again, use extreme caution when looking at exposure limits on material safety data sheets. Make sure that they're from a trusted and reputable source. Finally, I'd like to end by saying here at Affygility Solutions, we've developed hundreds of occupational exposure limits for active pharmaceutical ingredients. These limits are developed by occupational health professionals with advanced degrees and professional certifications and decades of industry experience. Through our new online service called OEL Fast Track, we've made many of these OEL monographs available for purchase with instant downloads, so it's very, very convenient to obtain one. Check it out by going to OELFastTrack.com. Finally, if you'd like more information regarding occupational exposure limits for active pharmaceutical ingredients, you can contact us through any of those sources you see there on the screen. That's it for today. Have a great rest of the weekend. Bye.